The BBC has a long, and some might say rather irresponsible history of crowbarring April Fool's jokes into current affairs programming. These spoofs have often been wildly successful in their aim of fooling the public, though we might say that in many ways it's like shooting fish in a barrel. After all, people will be more inclined to believe something if they see it in a news broadcast. Okay, perhaps not now, where huge swathes of the population believe everything to be a false flag operation that's been staged, and where the lines between facts, opinions and made-up scaremongering are often blurred by alleged news outlets. But there was a lot more trust in broadcasters, especially anti-Beeb, back in the day. And so, if BBC One's news magazine show Nationwide told you that strange and sinister scientific experiments were being carried out in rural England, you were probably going to believe it. For a while at least. First though, some history. The most famous BBC April Fool spoof was their first, the 1957 Panorama story on the spaghetti harvest that convinced the nation, or at least a part of it, that spaghetti was grown on trees and harvested in Switzerland. Back in 1957, Britain was a far more insular nation than it is today. There was much less international travel, immigration, or exposure to other cultures, so it's not too surprising that many people had no real idea just how spaghetti was made, or even what it was made of. Indeed, it might have been a mysterious, untried exotic treat for many who were still labouring under the post-war rationing restrictions. Given that Panorama was, and is, the BBC's flagship heavyweight current affairs show, viewers were not exactly forewarned that it might suddenly lurch into satire, especially with no precedent for such things. It's also notable that shows like this will be broadcast long after the midday cut-off point for April Fool's pranks, the broadcaster's desperate desire to be in on the joke disregarding the basic rules of engagement. By the evening, you might have reasonably expected that many viewers with better things to worry about would have forgotten that it was April Fool's Day, if it had even registered with them to begin with. It was an easy spoof to pull off, but nevertheless the BBC seemed very pleased with itself, and the spaghetti harvest remains a classic clip to trot out on light entertainment shows where smug presenters and guests can scoff at the ignorant trolls of yesteryear. Nationwide was not, it must be said, a heavyweight current affairs show. It was broadcast in the slot after the national and local tea time news programmes at 6:30 and might be best described as a less lowbrow version of the One Show. I'm aware that you can hardly get more lowbrow than the One Show, but still. Nationwide mixed consumer stories, lightweight news and feel-good slots from regional news presenters brought together for the nation to unwind from the more serious news stories. It was essentially a conduit between the news to the prime-time evening entertainment broadcasts, shown every weekday and watched, effectively by default more than anything, by a huge audience. It was also, when you think about it for a while, exactly the sort of show that you might well have expected to engage in April tomfoolery. In 1980, Nationwide ran a story that, in retrospect, was so ludicrous that you can barely credit anyone falling for it, if only because the ramifications of what they uncovered were so huge that you might have expected the story to have appeared in a rather more heavyweight slot rather than being a 7-minute item squeezed between local trivia and stories about people growing giant vegetables. In this report, a Terry Waite lookalike reporter investigates the mysterious Revel Biochemicals, a shady US genetics business that has set up in the gated stately home of Hobden House in Hertfordshire. Run by Hans Joachim Lugner, Nobel Prize winner, disgraced author of Genetic Engineering, Myths, Realities and Possibilities, and, worst of all, a German, rumours abounded locally about just what Revel Biochemicals were up to. Are they carrying out forbidden animal experiments? The 500 pounds of meat delivered to the house each week and the mysterious noises emitting from there suggested so, and reassurances from the furtive and shifty looking Lugner are hard to believe given that he comes to the gate wearing a blood-stained lab coat. After hearing strange roars, a brave cameraman climbs over the wall in what today would be seen as an example of unethical reporting and captures footage that fair boggles the mind. Actual dinosaurs, Tyrannosaurus rexes it seems, wandering around the grounds with gay abandon. Good lord. It's dramatic stuff and, of course, entirely ludicrous when you give it more than a moment's thought. But the report is brilliantly crafted to slowly pull you in, so the final revelation could actually momentarily make you believe that what you're seeing is real. It's essentially a mini found footage movie before the format really became a thing, and enough of those movies have fooled people into believing what they see is real to make initial audience reactions to this a bit more understandable. Yes, the dinosaur is a bit rubbery and probably stays on camera slightly too long to be convincing, but by this point many viewers would be so caught up in the story that it must have seemed oddly plausible, especially if you'd forgotten that this was April Fool's Day. And lest we forget, viewers were watching on small analog screens that showed considerably less detail than we're used to today. What's more, most viewers were perhaps not paying full attention, as Nationwide was very much an on-in-the-background type show. Certainly my mother had been thoroughly outraged by the more convincing earlier part. "Look at the state of his coat, he's definitely up to something," she shouted, and so was perfectly primed to be sucked in by the final revelation. Common sense quickly returned, but just for a moment it all seemed oddly real and strangely exciting. The report didn't have the lasting impact of the spaghetti harvest. It was perhaps a little too ludicrous and outrageous to have convinced anyone beyond the initial shock, and there were no War of the Worlds reports of mass panic. That would come a decade later with the infamous Ghost Watch. The clip rarely pops up in those lazy TV countdowns of best TV satires and so on. Nevertheless, it remains one of the maddest and most amusing spoofs, played with a suitably straight face throughout. And what's more, if it didn't seem entirely unlikely, you could easily imagine that Michael Crichton could have been holidaying in the UK in 1980 and caught this on TV, thinking to himself, "There's a book in this." Did you see this on the original broadcast? If so, were you at all fooled? Let us know in the comments and maybe share your own favourite media April Fool spoofs. There's plenty of them out there. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.